In a city where power grew from the seeds of silence, they thought they had perfected corruption. From street corners to the governor's mansion, an empire thrived on a simple truth: people would always choose safety over justice. The drugs moved quietly through neighborhood stores, the money vanished into shell companies, and convenient suspects took the fall when questions got too loud. Then they arrested Malik Thompson. They saw what they wanted to see: just another black teenager in the wrong place at the wrong time, the perfect distraction from their crumbling empire. What they didn't see was his best friend Jeremiah Williams, watching from the shadows. A quiet 14-year-old who witnessed everything. The man in the expensive suit, the mysterious package, the two perfect arrests that followed. They say the most dangerous person in any room is the one with nothing left to lose. But they were wrong. Sometimes the most dangerous person is a child who still believes in justice, holding a truth whose time has finally come. And when Jeremiah Williams stood up in that courtroom, nobody could have guessed that two simple words, "He's innocent," would bring down an empire and change their city forever. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The cracked mirror in the boys' locker room reflected Jeremiah Williams's troubled expression as he adjusted his worn basketball jersey. The 14-year-old's dark eyes held a wisdom that seemed out of place on such a young face, though right now they mostly showed exhaustion. Practice had run late again, but he didn't mind. Basketball was one of the few things that made sense in his world. The rhythmic bounce of the ball, the squeak of sneakers on hardwood, the perfect arc of a well-executed shot. These were constants he could rely on. The locker room still smelled of sweat and old sneakers, mixed with the sharp tang of industrial cleaner. Jeremiah took his time packing up, partly to avoid the rush of other players heading home, but mostly because he knew what waited for him: an empty apartment and a stack of homework that wouldn't do itself. "Yo, J-Man, you planning to live in that locker room?" Malik Thompson's voice echoed off the tile walls, followed by his characteristic laugh that always seemed to fill any space it occupied. Malik's tall frame appeared in the mirror behind Jeremiah, still dressed in his practice gear, his dark skin glistening with sweat despite having already showered. At 14, Malik already stood nearly 6 feet tall, all lean muscle and natural athleticism. "Just thinking," Jeremiah replied, shouldering his backpack. The weight of his textbooks reminded him of the math homework waiting at home. His mother, Lisa, would be working her second shift at the diner, and he'd have to heat up leftovers again. The microwave dinner wouldn't be much, but it was better than nothing. You think too much, that's your problem. Malik spun a basketball. On his finger, a trick that had become as natural as breathing to him. But that's why we're best friends. You think, I act, and together we're unstoppable. His grin was infectious, the kind that made everyone around him want to smile, too. Coach Wilson's voice carried from his office down the hall. "Thompson, Williams, lock up when you leave." The sound of his keys jingling and heavy footsteps followed, then the distant slam of the gym's double doors. "Come on," Malik said, tucking the basketball under his arm. "Mom's making her famous mac and cheese tonight. You know there's always a plate for you." Jeremiah smiled, but shook his head. "Thanks, but I should head home. Mom left me some work to do." It wasn't entirely true. Lisa hadn't left him any specific tasks, but Jeremiah knew she worried less when he was safely at home. They walked out into the cooling evening air, their sneakers scuffing against the cracked sidewalk. The neighborhood wasn't much to look at. Abandoned storefronts with faded signs, chain-link fences wrapped in dying vines, and the occasional group of men hanging around street corners. But it was home. The setting sun painted the worn buildings in shades of orange and purple, almost making them beautiful. A police cruiser rolled slowly past them, the officer inside watching with that familiar mix of suspicion and disdain. Malik's dribbling never faltered, but Jeremiah noticed how his friend's shoulders tensed slightly. "Coach says you've got a real shot at varsity next year," Jeremiah said, trying to distract them both. "Those scouts at last week's game couldn't take their eyes off you. I heard one of them talking about college programs. Malik's usual confident smile flickered for a moment. Yeah, if they can see past... He gestured vaguely at himself, letting the words hang in the air. They both knew what he meant. They'd seen how quickly people made assumptions about young black men in their neighborhood. How a hoodie or a basketball could transform from ordinary objects into supposed signs of threat. They'd be stupid not to see how good you are, Jeremiah insisted. You're the best player this school's had in years. Coach said so himself. Maybe, Malik replied, his voice unusually quiet. But you know how it is, Jay. One mistake, one wrong place at the wrong time, and none of that matters anymore. They just see what they want to see. The words hung heavy between them as they approached Miller's corner store. The fluorescent open sign buzzed faintly, casting a pale blue glow on the sidewalk. Through the fingerprinted windows, Jeremiah could see Mr. Miller's balding head behind the counter, but something about the scene made him pause. A man in an expensive-looking dark suit stood talking to Mr. Miller, whose normally ruddy face had gone pale. The suit seemed out of place in their neighborhood. Too crisp, too clean, too expensive. The man's posture was casual, but something about the way he leaned on the counter reminded Jeremiah of the way cats looked just before pouncing did. You see that? Jeremiah whispered. But Malik was focused on his dribbling, practicing the behind-the-back move Coach had shown them earlier. Before Jeremiah could say more, a figure in a black ski mask burst through the store's door. The man wasn't large, but he moved with purpose, clutching a small package wrapped in brown paper. Not cash from the register, just that single package. The masked man's breathing was controlled, not panicked like you'd expect from a robber. Hey! Mr. Miller's shout broke the evening quiet. The masked man sprinted past them, disappearing down an alley. His footsteps were eerily quiet, like he'd planned this route carefully. Seconds later, police sirens pierced the air. 2 patrol cars screeched around the corner, their response time impossibly quick, as if they'd been waiting nearby. 4 officers jumped out, weapons drawn. Jeremiah's heart pounded as he raised his hands instinctively, but the officers ignored him completely. Get on the ground! Now! An officer tackled Malik from behind, sending the basketball bouncing away, into the gutter. Malik's face hit the concrete hard, the sound making Jeremiah's stomach turn. Wait! Jeremiah stepped forward, his voice cracking with panic. He didn't do anything. We were just walking home from practice. We've been at the school. Coach Wilson can tell you. Shut up and stay back. Another officer shoved Jeremiah away, while 2 more pinned Malik down, roughly cuffing his hands behind his back. Their movements were practiced, mechanical, as if they'd decided Malik's guilt before they'd even arrived. I swear I didn't do anything. Malik's voice cracked with fear. Blood trickled from his split lip where it had hit the sidewalk. Jeremiah, tell them. Tell them we were at practice. Tell them about Coach. Jeremiah opened his mouth to protest again, but caught a glimpse of something that made his blood run cold. The man in the dark suit was watching from a black sedan parked across the street. Their eyes met, and the man's expression was clear, a warning. The message in his cold stare needed no words. Stay quiet, or else. You're under arrest for armed robbery, the officer announced, yanking Malik to his feet. You have the right to remain silent. This is crazy. Jeremiah, please. Malik's eyes found his friends as they pushed him toward the patrol car. The fear in them was like nothing Jeremiah had ever seen before. This wasn't just fear of getting in trouble. This was the fear of someone who knew the system wasn't designed to protect them. But Jeremiah stood frozen, the man in the suit's threatening gaze still burning into him. He watched helplessly as they shoved his best friend into the back of the patrol car. The same friend who'd stood up for him against bullies in elementary school, who'd shared his lunch when Jeremiah's mom couldn't afford groceries, who'd taught him to play basketball when everyone else laughed at how clumsy he was. The patrol cars pulled away, their sirens silent now, as if they didn't want to draw more attention than necessary. The man in the suit got into his black sedan and drove off in the opposite direction, his tinted windows rolling up smoothly. Mr. Miller had disappeared back into his store, the open sign now turned to closed. The entire incident had taken less than 5 minutes, but Jeremiah knew nothing would ever be the same. Jeremiah walked home in a daze, his mind replaying everything. In horrible detail, the package, the masked man, the suit, the warning look. None of it made sense, but he knew one thing. What had happened to Malik wasn't right. The pieces didn't fit together. The man in the suit, the perfectly timed police response, the focus on Malik, despite Jeremiah being right there too. The street seemed different now, more threatening. Every passing car made him flinch. Every shadow could be hiding someone watching. The neighborhood he'd grown up in, where he knew every crack in the sidewalk and every stray cat, suddenly felt like enemy territory. He found his mother Lisa in the kitchen, getting ready to leave for her night shift at the diner. She took one look at his face and knew something was wrong. Lisa had always been able to read him like that, picking up on the smallest signs that something wasn't right. "Baby, what happened?" She sat down at their small kitchen table, her waitress, uniform already on, but her comfortable shoes still untied. The worry lines around her eyes deepened as she studied his face. Jeremiah told her everything, his words tumbling out in a rush. With each detail, his mother's face grew more concerned. When he described the man in the suit and the warning look, her hands clenched into fists on the table. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that meant she was thinking hard about what to say next. "You saw what really happened," she finally said, her voice tight with worry. "But sometimes telling the truth can be dangerous, especially when powerful people want it kept quiet. We've seen it before in this neighborhood. Things that don't add up, people who disappear or get blamed for things they didn't do. But Malik's innocent. They're calling him a criminal, and he didn't do anything wrong." Jeremiah's voice cracked with frustration. "We were at practice. Coach Wilson can verify it. There's probably security cameras at the school that show when we left." Lisa reached across the table and took his hand. Her palm was warm and calloused, from years of carrying heavy trays. "I know, baby, and I raised you to stand up for what's right. But we have to be smart about this. These people, the man in the suit, the officers who didn't even check what happened, they have power, and they don't play fair." As if to emphasize her point, a car with tinted windows drove slowly past their house, its engine barely more than a whisper. Lisa got up and peeked through the curtains, her expression hardening. The car passed by once, then circled back, moving even slower the second time. "They're watching," she whispered. "They know you saw." She pulled the curtains tighter, though they both knew that wouldn't really protect them. Jeremiah's phone buzzed with notifications. Videos of Malik's arrest were already spreading online, filmed by witnesses who'd been too afraid to intervene. The comments were a mix of angry calls for justice and ugly assumptions about Malik's character. People who had never met him, never seen his gentle smile or heard his laugh, were happy to believe the worst. Breaking news. Local teen arrested in connection with armed robbery. The headline flashed across his screen, followed by Malik's school photo. Below it, the article mentioned suspected gang affiliations and a history of suspicious activity. All lies, but lies that people would believe because they fit what they wanted to think about kids like Malik. "What do I do, Mom?" Jeremiah asked, feeling smaller and more helpless than he had in years. "If I don't say anything, they're going to keep lying about him. But if I do..." Lisa pulled him into a tight hug. She smelled like the diner's coffee and the lavender lotion she always used, familiar scents that usually meant safety but couldn't quite comfort him now. "For now, you stay quiet and stay safe. We'll figure this out together. But promise me you won't do anything without talking to me first." Jeremiah nodded against her shoulder, but his mind was already racing. The truth was burning inside him, demanding to be told. But every time he thought about speaking up, he saw the man in the suit's cold eyes, felt the weight of his silent threat. And now it wasn't just his safety he had to worry about. They knew where he lived. Could hurt. His mother, too. "I have to go to work," Lisa said reluctantly, finally tying her shoes. "Lock all the doors and windows. Don't answer if anyone knocks. And baby? She paused at the door, her face serious. Stay away from the windows. If you see that car again, call me immediately. After she left, Jeremiah heated up his dinner, but couldn't eat. The microwave hummed in the quiet apartment, but every small noise made him jump. The ice maker dropping cubes, the building's old pipes creaking, the distant sound of sirens that might or might not be heading toward Malik. That night, Jeremiah lay awake in bed, listening to cars passing on the street outside. Every engine sound made him tense, wondering if it was the black sedan returning. His phone kept lighting up with messages from their teammates, asking what had happened, sharing the videos, expressing disbelief. The last message was from Malik's mother. Please, if you know anything that can help my son, come forward. Attached was a photo of Malik from last summer, grinning proudly in his basketball uniform after winning the local tournament. The sight of it made Jeremiah's chest ache. He turned his phone face down and stared at the ceiling, tears burning in his eyes. He had never felt so torn between doing what was right and doing what was safe. The truth could save his best friend, or it could put everyone he loved in danger. Through his window, he could see the street lamp's yellow glow creating shadows on his ceiling. One of those shadows suddenly shifted as another car drove past, moving too slowly to be just passing. Through. Jeremiah pulled his blanket up higher, trying to make himself smaller, invisible. Tomorrow, he would have to walk into school alone, sit through classes alone, eat lunch alone, face the whispers and stares alone. All while carrying the weight of a truth he was afraid to tell. The truth about the package, about the man in the suit, about how the police had shown up too fast and known exactly who to target. But for now, all he could do was lie in the dark, haunted by the image of Malik's terrified face as they took him away, and pray that somehow he would find the courage to do what needed to be done, because somewhere in the city, his best friend was spending the night in a cell for a crime he didn't commit, while the real criminals drove around in expensive suits and police cars, watching and waiting to see what Jeremiah would do. The night stretched on, and sleep remained elusive. Each passing hour brought morning closer. Morning, when he would have to face a world that had suddenly become much more dangerous, much more complicated than the one he'd known just hours ago. A world where telling the truth could be the bravest or the most foolish thing he could do, and he wasn't sure which it would be. The fluorescent lights of the juvenile detention center made Malik's bruised face look even worse. 3 days had passed since his arrest, and Jeremiah sat across from him at the visitation table, trying not to stare at the split lip that hadn't quite healed. The orange jumpsuit hung loose on Malik's frame. He'd already lost weight. They assigned me some public defender named Peterson, Malik said, his voice barely above a whisper. His usual confidence had vanished, replaced by a wariness that hurt Jeremiah to see. Man barely looked at me during our meeting, kept checking his phone, like he had somewhere better to be. Jeremiah leaned forward, conscious of the guard watching them from the corner. What did he say about your case? Says, I should take a plea deal. Malik's laugh was hollow. 3 years, maybe out in 18 months with good behavior. Says it's the best offer I'm gonna get, being a young black male with gang affiliations. The bitterness in his voice made Jeremiah flinch. I told him I've never been in a gang, never even got detention at school. He just shrugged. A memory flashed through Jeremiah's mind. The man in the suit, the package, the too quick police response. The words burned in his throat, begging to be spoken. But before he could say anything, Malik shook his head slightly, his eyes darting toward I. The security cameras mounted in each corner. Don't, Malik whispered. Whatever you're thinking, don't. They've been asking about you, about what you might have seen. Strange men in suits coming to ask questions. My lawyer doesn't even seem to care that I have an alibi with Coach Wilson, Thikri. Visiting room suddenly felt colder. Jeremiah's palms began to sweat as he remembered the car that still drove past his house each night, its tinted windows hiding whoever watched them. The guard stepped closer. Time's up. Just tell my mom I love her, Malik said as they stood. And Jay, stay safe. Some things are bigger than us. Walking out of the detention center, Jeremiah almost collided with a group of reporters setting up cameras on the sidewalk. The police were holding a press conference about Malik's case, and the media had turned out in force. Chief Bradley stood at a podium, his brass buttons gleaming in the morning sun. We have reason to believe this suspect is connected to a series of robberies in the area. Our investigation has uncovered evidence of gang activity. Jeremiah's hands clenched into fists as he listened to the lies. They were painting Malik as some kind of hardened criminal, talking about surveillance footage they claimed to have but never showed, witnesses who somehow never came forward. Sources within the department suggest this could be part of a larger criminal network operating in our city, a reporter said, holding her microphone toward the chief. Any comment on rumors that these robberies might be connected to drug trafficking? The chief's response was measured, practiced. We're exploring all possibilities, but I want to be clear. We will not allow our streets to be taken over by criminal elements, no matter how young they may be. As the chief spoke, Jeremiah noticed a familiar black sedan parked across the street. The man in the suit stood beside it, watching the press conference with a slight smile. When he noticed Jeremiah looking, he raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. That night, Lisa was waiting when Jeremiah got home. She'd taken a rare evening off from the diner, and papers were spread across their kitchen table. I've been doing some research, she said, gesturing for him to sit, about the store that was robbed. Jeremiah looked at the papers. Property records, newspaper clippings, printouts from the city council's website. What did you find? Miller's Corner store changed hands 6 months ago, Lisa said, pointing to a document. The new owner is a company called Riverside Holdings LLC, but look who's on the board of directors. She slid over another paper, and Jeremiah's breath caught. There, listed among the company officers, was the name James Whitaker, their district's city councilman. That's not all, Lisa continued, her voice dropping lower even though they were alone. 3 other stores in the neighborhood were bought by the same company. All of them have been robbed in the past month, and each time the security cameras mysteriously malfunctioned. A knock at the door made them both jump. Lisa quickly gathered the papers, shoving them into a drawer. Through the peephole, they saw 2 people, a man and a woman wearing matching black jackets with Community Action Network printed on the back. Mrs. Williams, the woman called through the door. We need to talk about what's happening in our neighborhood, about the robberies, and about Malik Thompson. Lisa pressed a finger to her lips, signaling Jeremiah to stay quiet. They waited until footsteps retreated down the hallway before breathing again. They're not really activists, Lisa whispered. I've seen them before, watching the diner when certain people come to meet. They're connected to whatever's really going on. Jeremiah's phone buzzed, a news alert. Another video of Malik's arrest had surfaced. This one showing more clearly how the officers had ignored his attempts to explain about basketball practice. The comments were a battlefield between those demanding justice and those defending the police. Mom, Jeremiah said, showing her the video. We have to do something. They're destroying his life over a lie. Lisa's face was troubled. Baby, I think this goes deeper than we know. The councilman, the fake activists, the police chief, they're all connected somehow. And that package they stole, I don't think it was random. She was interrupted by the sound of breaking glass. They rushed to Jeremiah's room to find a brick had been thrown through his window. Wrapped around it was a note. Keep your mouth shut, or the next one won't miss. Lisa called the police, but the officers who came seemed uninterested. They barely looked at the brick, didn't dust for fingerprints, and suggested it was probably just kids causing trouble. One of them, Officer Parker, lingered behind as his partner returned to their car. Word of advice, Parker said quietly, not looking directly at them. Whatever you think you know, forget it. Some doors are better left closed. He paused, then added, Shame about the Thompson kid. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong color. But that's how it goes, right? After the police left, Lisa double-checked all the locks while Jeremiah cleaned up the broken glass. Neither of them spoke about the officer's warning, but its meaning was clear. The police weren't just failing to help, they were actively part of whatever was happening. That night, Jeremiah couldn't sleep again. His boarded-up window made the room feel like a prison cell, and he couldn't stop thinking about Malik in his real cell, facing years behind bars for something he didn't do. Around midnight, his phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. "Meet me tomorrow, 4 p.m., library. Reference section. Come alone. Bring what you saw." Jeremiah showed the message to his mother in the morning. "It could be a trap," she said, but her expression was thoughtful. "Or it could be someone else who knows the truth and wants to help." "I have to try," Jeremiah replied. "For Malik." Lisa was quiet for a long moment. "Okay," she finally said. "But we do this smart. I'll be outside in the car, watching. You go in, but at the first sign of trouble you run. Promise me." The next day, Jeremiah's heart pounded as he walked into the library. The reference section was deserted except for one person, a woman in her 30s with close-cropped hair and tired eyes typing on a laptop. "You must be Jeremiah," she said without looking up. "I'm Sarah Chen. I'm an investigative journalist, and I think your friend Malik was set up to take the fall for something much bigger." She turned her laptop around, showing him a complex diagram of connections: businesses, politicians, police officers, all linked by lines and notes. The store robberies, the corrupted evidence, the rushed arrests, they're all part of a pattern. But I need a witness. Someone who saw what really happened. Someone like you. Jeremiah stared at the screen, recognizing names. Councilman Whitaker, Chief Bradley, Riverside Holdings LLC. "Why should I trust you?" Sarah smiled grimly. "Because unlike them, I can prove everything I claim." She pulled out a manila envelope. "This contains financial records showing millions moving through shell companies tied to the councilman. Store, robberies used as cover for drug shipments, falsified police reports. But without a witness to connect the dots, it's just circumstantial." "They're watching my house," Jeremiah said. "They threatened my mom." "I know. They threatened me too." Sarah rolled up her sleeve, showing a fresh bruise. "But here's the thing about bullies. They only win if we stay scared. Your friend Malik? He's not the first person they've framed, and he won't be the last unless someone stands up." A shadow fell across the table. Jeremiah turned to see two men in dark suits at the end of the aisle, one of them painfully familiar. Sarah quickly closed. Her laptop. "Time to go," she whispered, sliding a business card into Jeremiah's hand. "Think about what I said. And watch your back. They're getting nervous, which means they're getting dangerous." Jeremiah walked home taking a circuitous route, checking constantly for followers. But he couldn't stop thinking about Sarah's words, about the evidence she'd shown him. The pieces were starting to fit together. The package, the staged robbery, the quick arrest. All of it orchestrated to keep something bigger hidden. When he got home, Lisa was watching the news. Another press conference, this time with Councilman Whitaker standing beside Chief Bradley. They were announcing a new Tough on Crime initiative, using Malik's case as an example of the growing gang problem in their neighborhood. "Look at their faces," Lisa said softly. "They're not even trying to hide it anymore. They think they're untouchable." Jeremiah felt the weight of Sarah's business card in his pocket. The choice loomed before him. Stay quiet and safe while an innocent friend suffered, or speak up and risk everything to expose the truth. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Malik's mother. "They're pushing for a quick trial. The public defender says we should take the plea deal. Please, if you know anything that could help." Jeremiah closed his eyes, remembering Malik's words in the detention center. "Some things are bigger than us." But maybe that was exactly why they had to fight, because the bigger the corruption, the more important it was to stop it. "Mom," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I think I know what I have to do." Lisa looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, baby. But whatever you're planning, we do it together." They might be powerful, but they don't know how strong we can be when we stand up for what's right. Outside, the familiar black sedan cruised past their window, its tinted glass reflecting the setting sun. But this time, Jeremiah didn't duck away. Instead, he stood straighter, watching it pass. They might be watching him, but now he was watching them too. And soon, everyone would see the truth they were trying so hard to hide. The coming days would be dangerous. He knew that. But as he thought about Malik in his cell, about Sarah's evidence, about all the other people who might have been framed before, he realized that staying quiet was no longer an option. The truth was like a fire inside him, and it was time to let it burn. Lisa squeezed his shoulder, understanding in her eyes. "Whatever happens next," she said, "we face it together. That's what family does." Jeremiah nodded, already planning his next move. The game had changed. He was no longer just a witness trying to stay hidden. Now he was becoming something they feared much more. Someone ready to speak up, someone ready to fight back, someone who knew their secrets and wasn't afraid anymore. Sun set over their neighborhood, casting long shadows through the boarded-up window. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new challenges, new threats, but it would also bring hope. Hope for justice, hope for Malik, hope for everyone who had ever been silenced by power and fear. The truth was coming, and not all the suits, badges, or threats in the world could stop it now. The courthouse loomed, over Jeremiah like a mountain of stone and steel, its windows reflecting the morning sun with an almost hostile glare. After a week of threats, surveillance, and sleepless nights, the day of Malik's preliminary hearing had arrived. Jeremiah stood at the bottom of the steps, his mother's hand steady on his shoulder, watching people file through the security checkpoints. "Remember what we discussed?" Lisa whispered. "Keep your head down. Just observe. Sarah said she'd meet us inside." The metal detectors beeped as they passed through, and Jeremiah noticed how the security guards seemed to scrutinize them more closely than the white lawyers rushing past with their briefcases. Inside, the marble halls echoed with footsteps and whispered conversations. Through the crowd, Jeremiah spotted Councilman Whitaker talking to Chief Bradley near the elevators, their heads close together in conversation. The councilman looked up, catching Jeremiah's eye. His smile was practiced, political, but his eyes were cold. He whispered something to the chief, who turned to stare at Jeremiah with undisguised hostility. "This way." Sarah Chen appeared beside them, guiding them down a side hallway. The journalist looked different today, professional in a blazer and skirt, her usual casual demeanor replaced by focused intensity. "Courtroom 3. But be prepared. They're going to try to paint Malik as a hardened criminal." They found seats in the back of the courtroom, trying to blend in with the small crowd of spectators. Malik's family sat in the front row, his mother's back straight with dignity despite her obvious exhaustion, his little sister clutching a worn teddy bear. The bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise. Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge William Marshall presiding." Judge Marshall was older, with steel gray hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. He shuffled through papers as everyone settled back into their seats, his expression unreadable. The prosecutor, a sharp-featured woman named Andrea Pierce, rose first. "Your Honor, the state presents a clear case of armed robbery, with evidence suggesting ties to organized gang activity. The defendant, Malik Thompson, was apprehended at the scene." "Objection, Your Honor." Malik's public defender, Peterson, spoke without even standing fully. "The characterization of my client—" "Save it for cross-examination," Judge Marshall cut him off. "Continue, Ms. Pierce." As the prosecutor launched into her opening statement, Jeremiah felt his anger rising. Every word was a lie, carefully constructed to fit their narrative. She described the suspicious behavior of known gang members in the area, conveniently ignoring that Malik had been walking home from basketball practice in his school uniform. Peterson's defense was half-hearted at best. He mentioned Malik's clean record and Coach Wilson's alibi, but his tone suggested he'd already accepted defeat. When he fumbled with his notes, dropping papers on the floor, Jeremiah saw several jury members exchange skeptical glances. The state calls Officer James Parker to the stand. Parker, the same officer who'd warned them at their house, took the oath. His testimony was smooth, rehearsed, describing how they'd responded to reports of suspicious activity and found Malik fleeing the scene. "And did you recover any evidence from the defendant?" Pierce asked. "No, Your Honor," Parker admitted. "But we believe he passed the stolen items to an accomplice before we could apprehend him." Jeremiah gripped the bench until his knuckles turned white. The package, the real evidence, wasn't even being mentioned. He leaned forward to whisper to Sarah, but she subtly shook her head, pointing to two men in suits watching them from the gallery. The morning dragged on with more testimony. From officers and store employees, none mentioned the man in the suit or the mysterious package. Mr. Miller, looking nervous and pale, testified about being threatened by a young man matching the defendant's description, though Jeremiah knew he'd never even seen Malik before. The arrest. During a brief recess, Sarah pulled them into an empty conference room. "They're building a wall of lies," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "But there's something else happening here. Look who's in the gallery. James Henderson, the state's biggest real estate developer. Robert Walsh from the Port Authority. These aren't people who show up for a simple robbery case. They're all connected to the councilman," Lisa realized. "Through those shell companies you found." Sarah nodded. "This isn't just about framing Malik anymore. They're sending a message to the whole community. Stay quiet, don't ask questions, or this could happen to you." A knock at the door made them all jump. A court officer peered in. "Ms. Chen, someone would like to speak with you." Sarah's expression hardened. "Tell Councilman Whitaker I'm not interested in his offers." "It's not the councilman," the officer said. "It's Judge Marshall." Sarah exchanged surprised looks with Lisa before following the officer out. When she returned 10 minutes later, her face was ashen. "The judge knows," she whispered. "Not everything, but enough. He's being pressured to push this through quickly, but he has doubts. He asked if I had any concrete evidence of misconduct." "The package," Jeremiah said suddenly. "Everyone's testified about a robbery, but nobody's mentioned what was actually stolen. Because it wasn't money, it was that package, and the security cameras would have shown the real robber," Sarah finished, "if they hadn't conveniently malfunctioned." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through documents. "I've been tracking similar malfunctions at other properties owned by Riverside Holdings. Always on specific dates, always when certain shipments were scheduled." The afternoon session began with character witnesses for the prosecution. Teachers who remembered Malik as troubled, though his grades were good. A school resource officer who claimed he'd seen Malik with known gang members, his basketball teammates. Even a neighbor who described him as intimidating, despite his reputation for helping elderly residents with their groceries. Peterson's cross-examinations were weak, missing obvious contradictions. When Malik's basketball coach finally took the stand to provide his alibi, the prosecutor skillfully twisted his words, suggesting that leaving practice early was proof of planning the robbery. Jeremiah felt sick watching Malik at the defendant's table. His friend sat slumped in his chair, the orange jumpsuit hanging loose on his frame, dark circles under his eyes speaking of sleepless nights. Every lie seemed to weigh on him, pushing him further down. During another break, Sarah received a text that made her curse under her breath. "They're pushing for an immediate arraignment," she said. "They want Malik to accept a plea deal before we can build a proper defense. 6 years, reduced to 4 with good behavior." 6 years? Lisa's voice shook with anger. "For a crime he didn't commit? He'd be 20 before he got out. They're hoping he'll be scared enough to take it," Sarah explained. "Once he pleads guilty, it doesn't matter what evidence we find later. The case is closed, the questions go away, and their secret stays safe." Jeremiah watched Malik being led back into the courtroom, shoulders hunched under the weight of the lies surrounding him. Something inside him snapped. "I have to say something," he declared. "I was there. I saw everything. I can testify." "Jeremiah." "No," Lisa grabbed his arm. "You heard Sarah. They've got powerful people watching. This goes all the way to the state level. They could hurt you, or worse. They're already hurting people. Jeremiah's voice rose with emotion. Malik, his family, everyone in our neighborhood who's afraid to speak up. How many others have they framed? How many lives have they ruined because everyone was too scared to stop them? Sarah studied him thoughtfully. He's right. We need a witness, someone they can't ignore or discredit easily. A teenager who was there who can testify to what he saw. It could break their whole narrative. They'll come after him, Lisa protested. You've seen what they're capable of. Maybe, Sarah admitted. But they're also getting sloppy, desperate. The judge is suspicious, the media's asking questions, and too many people are watching now. If Jeremiah testifies, it could give others the courage to come forward too. The courtroom doors opened for the afternoon session. As they filed back in, Jeremiah noticed more faces in the gallery. Community activists, local reporters, even some of Malik's teammates and their parents. The story was growing too big to contain. I'm doing it, he whispered to his mother. Not just for Malik, for everyone they've hurt, everyone they've scared into silence. You taught me to stand up for what's right, no matter how hard it is. Lisa's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. Together, she reminded him. Whatever happens, we face it together. Sarah squeezed his shoulder. I'll talk to Malik's lawyer, get him to call you as a witness. But be ready. They'll try to discredit. You twist your words, maybe even threaten you openly in court. Are you sure about this? Jeremiah watched as Malik was led back to the defendant's table. His friend looked up, their eyes meeting briefly. In that moment, Jeremiah saw past the fear and exhaustion to the person he knew, the kid who'd taught him basketball, who'd stood up to bullies, who'd never backed down from doing what was right. I'm sure, Jeremiah said firmly. They think they can scare everyone into staying quiet, into accepting their lies. But they're wrong. The truth matters. Justice matters. And I'm not going to let them take that away from us. Sarah nodded, already, typing on her phone. I'll have the evidence ready. Everything I've gathered about the shell companies, the pattern of robberies, the corrupted security footage. Once you testify about what you saw, it all fits together. The judge called the court back to order. As the prosecutor launched into another round of character assassination, Jeremiah sat straighter in his seat. Tomorrow, he would take the stand. Tomorrow, the truth would finally come out. He felt eyes on him, the councilman, the police chief, the men in suits scattered throughout the gallery. Their threats and intimidation had worked for so long because people were isolated, afraid to stand alone, but they weren't alone anymore. Looking around the courtroom, Jeremiah saw determination in his mother's face, professional focus in Sarah's expression, growing hope in Malik's family's eyes. Even some of the jurors seemed to be paying closer attention, perhaps sensing that there was more to this case than they'd been told. The afternoon sun slanted through the high windows, casting long shadows across the courtroom floor. Tomorrow, those shadows would begin to recede as light was finally shed on the truth. Tomorrow, the real story would be told. Jeremiah wasn't just a witness anymore. He was becoming something much more powerful. A voice for justice. A symbol of courage. Proof that even the most carefully constructed lies could be torn down by someone brave enough to speak the truth. The cost might be high, but silence had its own price. One paid in broken lives and stolen futures. It was time to show that some things were worth fighting for, worth risking everything to protect. Tomorrow, 2 simple words would change everything. He's innocent, and no amount of power, money, or corruption would be able to bury the truth again. Morning light filtered through the courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors as people filed into courtroom 3 for the second day of Malik's hearing. The gallery was packed. Word had spread about potential revelations, drawing more spectators than the previous day. Local reporters clutched notebooks, community members whispered among themselves, and suits filled the back rows like dark birds of prey. Jeremiah's heart thundered in his chest as he sat between his mother and Sarah Chen. They'd arrived early, watching the room fill up person by person. Each familiar face from their neighborhood gave him strength. Each suspicious glare from the suits reminded him of what was at stake. "Remember," Sarah whispered, "stick to what you saw. Don't let them twist your words or rush you. The truth is on our side." Lisa squeezed his hand. "Whatever happens, I'm proud of you, baby." The bailiff's voice cut through the murmur of conversation. "All rise. Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge William Marshall presiding." As everyone settled back into their seats, Jeremiah caught Malik's eye at the defendant's table. His friend looked different today, still tired, still wearing that oversized orange jumpsuit, but sitting straighter, as if sensing something was about to change. The prosecutor, Andrea Pierce, rose smoothly to her feet. "Your Honor, the state would like to continue with testimony regarding the defendant's character and known associations." Objection. Peterson, Malik's public defender, finally showed some spark of life. "Your Honor, I have a witness who was present at the scene of the alleged crime. Someone who can testify to what actually happened that day." Judge Marshall peered over his reading glasses. "Approach the bench." As the lawyers huddled with the judge, Councilman Whitaker shifted in his seat, leaning over to whisper something to Chief Bradley. The chief's face darkened as he scanned the courtroom, his eyes eventually finding Jeremiah. "The court will hear this witness," Judge Marshall announced. "Call them to the stand." Peterson straightened his rumpled tie. "The defense calls Jeremiah Williams." A ripple of whispers swept through the courtroom. Jeremiah stood on legs that felt like water, his mother's hand falling away from his. As he walked toward the witness stand, he felt every eye in the room boring into him. The suits in the back row were already on their phones, texting rapidly. The bailiff approached with a Bible. "Place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" "I do." Jeremiah's voice came out steadier than he expected. Peterson approached, his earlier lethargy seemingly forgotten. "Mr. Williams, where were you on the afternoon of April 15th? "I was walking home from basketball practice with Malik Thompson. We'd stayed late to work on some new plays Coach Wilson taught us." "And what did you see as you passed Miller's corner store?" Jeremiah took a deep breath, remembering Sarah's advice. "We saw Mr. Miller talking to a man in an expensive dark suit. Mr. Miller looked scared. A few minutes later, a masked man ran out of the store with a package. Not money, just a brown paper package." Objection. Pierce was on her feet. "This witness is clearly coached, reciting a rehearsed story. I'm telling the truth." Jeremiah's voice rang out clear and strong, silencing the courtroom. Even the judge seemed taken aback by his conviction. "Continue, Mr. Williams," Judge Marshall said after a moment. "But stick to what you personally witnessed." Jeremiah nodded, then described everything. The masked man's careful movements, the police's impossibly quick arrival, the brutal arrest of Malik despite his obvious innocence. With each detail, he saw reactions ripple through the courtroom. Jurors leaned forward. Reporters scribbled frantically. The suits in the back looked increasingly uncomfortable. "And the man in the suit," Peterson prompted. "Did you see him again after the robbery?" "Yes. He was watching from a black sedan across the street. When the police arrested Malik, the man smiled. Later, I saw him talking to—" Objection, Pierce's voice cracked like a whip. "This witness is making unfounded accusations." "Your Honor," Peterson countered, suddenly animated. "This goes to establishing a pattern of suspicious activity surrounding the arrest." Judge Marshall held up his hand. "I'll allow it, but tread carefully." Jeremiah continued, describing the surveillance of his house, the threatening note thrown through his window, Officer Parker's warning. As he spoke, he noticed Judge Marshall, studying Chief Bradley and Councilman Whitaker with increasing scrutiny. "One more question," Peterson said. "Why did you wait until now to come forward?" Jeremiah looked directly at the suits in the back row, then at Chief Bradley, and finally, at Councilman Whitaker. "Because I was scared." They made it clear what would happen to people who told the truth. But I couldn't let them send my friend to prison for something he didn't do, just to cover up their secrets. Pierce stood for cross-examination, her heels clicking ominously as she approached the witness stand. Mr. Williams, isn't it true that you and the defendant are close friends? Yes. I've known Malik since elementary school. So you'd say anything to help him avoid punishment? I'd tell the truth to help him avoid being punished for something he didn't do. Pierce's smile was sharp. You claim to have seen many suspicious things that day. A mysterious man in a suit, a package instead of money, police officers supposedly ignoring your friend's innocence. Yet you didn't report any of this at the time. Why should we believe you now? Because I can prove it. Sarah Chen's voice rang out from the gallery. She stood holding up a USB drive. Your Honor, I have evidence corroborating everything Jeremiah has testified to. Property records, financial transactions, patterns of similar incidents at other properties owned by Riverside Holdings, LLC. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Councilman Whitaker shot to his feet, his face red. Chief Bradley was already moving toward the exit. The suits in the back row began shouting about inadmissible evidence and proper procedures. Order. Judge Marshall's gavel cracked like a gunshot. This court will have order. Through the commotion, Jeremiah noticed something strange. Mr. Miller, sitting in the witness box, had gone completely pale. His hands shook as he pulled something from his jacket. A small recording device. Your Honor, Miller's voice quavered but carried. I have something else. Something they made me hide. Pierce spun toward him. Mr. Miller, I advise you to remain silent. No. Miller stood straighter. I've been silent too long. What that boy said is true, all of it. I was threatened, forced to lie. The recording proves it. They've been using my store, other stores too, moving things through them. This is absurd, Councilman Whitaker's voice boomed. Your Honor, I demand... You demand nothing in my courtroom, Councilman. Judge Marshall's tone could have frozen fire. Bailiff, secure that recording device. Ms. Pierce, approach the bench. Mr. Peterson, too. And someone find me a federal prosecutor. I believe we've stumbled onto a much larger case than a simple robbery. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Federal agents appeared as if by magic, some heading straight for Councilman Whitaker, while others cornered Chief Bradley before he could leave. The suits in the back tried to slip away, but found uniformed officers blocking the exits. Sarah worked her way through the chaos to Jeremiah's side. You did it. Your testimony was the crack they needed. Once one person stood up, others found their courage too. Jeremiah barely heard her. He was watching Malik, who sat stunned at the defendant's table as Peterson explained what was happening. Tears streaked his friend's face, but he was smiling for the first time since his arrest. Your Honor, Peterson called out over the commotion. Given these revelations, I move for immediate dismissal of all charges against my client. No objection. Your Honor, a new voice said. A tall woman in a federal prosecutor's badge had replaced Pierce at the state's table. In fact, we'd like to speak with Mr. Thompson, as a witness, not a defendant. Judge Marshall nodded. Charges dismissed. Mr. Thompson, you're free to go. Bailiff, remove those handcuffs. The moment the cuffs fell away, Malik's mother vaulted the divider and wrapped him in a fierce hug. His little sister joined them, still clutching her teddy bear, and soon they were surrounded by friends and neighbors offering congratulations and support. Jeremiah started to move toward them, but found his path blocked by the federal prosecutor. That was very brave, young man. We'll need to talk to you too. What you saw, what you heard, everything. People like you make our job possible. Later, Lisa interrupted, appearing at Jeremiah's side. Right now, my son needs rest, and his best friend just got released. The prosecutor smiled understandingly and stepped aside. Malik broke away from the crowd when he saw Jeremiah approach, and then they were hugging, both trying not to cry and failing. You did it, Malik whispered. You actually did it. We did it, Jeremiah corrected. All of us. You never gave up, never took their deal. And now everyone knows the truth. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the steps, cameras flashing. as federal agents led Councilman Whitaker and Chief Bradley out in handcuffs. Sarah Chen stood with a group of journalists, sharing copies of her evidence. Mr. Miller sat on a bench giving his statement to federal investigators, but in a quiet corner of the courthouse garden, two families celebrated together. Malik's mother hugged Lisa, both women crying and laughing at once. Malik's sister showed Jeremiah her teddy bear, solemnly informing him that it had helped keep her brother safe. And Malik himself couldn't stop grinning, breathing deeply of his first free air in days. "What happens now?" Jeremiah asked as they watched another wave of federal agents enter the courthouse. "Now the real work begins," Sarah said, joining them. "This goes deeper than one councilman and some corrupt cops. There's a whole network to uncover. Money laundering, drug trafficking, false arrests. But thanks to you, we finally have a way in." "Thanks to all of us," Jeremiah insisted. "You with your investigation, Mr. Miller with his recording, everyone who stood up once they saw they weren't alone." A black sedan drove past the courthouse, but this time its windows weren't tinted. Inside, federal agents were cataloging evidence. The car that had once meant fear now represented justice, and Jeremiah felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "We should celebrate," Malik's mother announced. "A proper dinner, both families together." "First," Lisa said with a smile, "I think these boys need some rest. It's been a long few days." As they walked down the courthouse steps together, Jeremiah noticed something remarkable. People weren't ducking away or avoiding eye contact anymore. Instead, they were standing tall, talking openly, sharing what they knew with investigators. The atmosphere of fear that had gripped their neighborhood was finally breaking. "You know what this means?" Malik nudged his shoulder. "Coach Wilson's gonna expect both of us at practice tomorrow. No excuses." Jeremiah laughed, and it felt like the first real laugh he'd had in days. "Wouldn't miss it. But you're gonna be rusty after all that time sitting in a cell." "Please," Malik scoffed. "I was practicing jump shots in my head the whole time. Just wait and see." They reached the bottom of the steps, just as the evening news vans were arriving. A reporter rushed up, microphone extended. "Jeremiah Williams, can you tell us what made you decide to speak up today?" Jeremiah looked at his mother, who had taught him to stand up for what was right. At Sarah, who had shown him that the truth was worth fighting for. At Mr. Miller, who had found his courage when he saw he wasn't alone. And at Malik, his best friend, who had never lost faith that justice would prevail. "Someone had to tell the truth," he said simply. "And once one person does that, it gives others the courage to do the same. That's how things change. One voice becomes many, and then even the most powerful lies can't stand anymore." The reporter asked another question, but Jeremiah was already walking away with his family and friends. There would be more questions later, more statements to give, more truth to tell. But for now, he just wanted to go home and rest, knowing that tomorrow would bring a better day. Not just for him and Malik, but for everyone who had lived too long in the shadow of corruption and fear. The sun was setting over their neighborhood as they walked home together, painting the sky in shades of hope. The week following Malik's release unfolded like a storm gathering strength. Sarah Chen's investigation, combined with Jeremiah's testimony and Mr. Miller's recording, had cracked open a dam of secrets that refused to stay contained. Federal agents swarmed through city offices, carrying out boxes of documents. More store owners came forward with similar stories of threats and coercion. The web of corruption grew larger by the day. Jeremiah sat in Sarah's cramped office at the local newspaper, watching her pin new photos and documents to an evidence board that now covered an entire wall. Red strings connected faces to places, events to shell companies, creating a visual map of the conspiracy. "Look at this," Sarah said, tapping a document. "Every property owned by Riverside Holdings shows the same pattern. Security cameras disabled on specific dates, matching scheduled deliveries from shell companies registered to offshore accounts. The package you saw? Probably part of their regular shipments." "But why frame Malik?" Jeremiah asked, studying the complex web of connections. "Why draw attention to themselves like that?" because of this. Sarah pulled up an email on her computer. 3 days before Malik's arrest, a community watchdog group filed a request to investigate unusual patterns at stores in your neighborhood. They were getting too close. The arrest was meant to distract, to make everyone focus on gang violence instead of what was really happening. Lisa, who'd taken to accompanying Jeremiah to these meetings, leaned forward. And the councilman? Where does he fit in? Right at the center. Sarah stood, drawing new lines on her board. Whitaker used his position to push through property purchases, block investigations, and influence police assignments. But he's just one piece. Look who he reports to. She pointed to a photograph of James Henderson, the real estate developer they'd seen in court. Henderson's companies own half the port, perfect setup for smuggling. Use legitimate businesses as cover, move contraband through multiple properties, and have corrupt officials smooth the way. A knock at the door made them all jump. It was Dave Morton, Sarah's editor, looking grave. You need to see this. He handed her a tablet displaying a news alert. Sarah's face darkened as she read. Chief Bradley was found dead in his holding cell an hour ago. They're calling it suicide. Suicide? Lisa's voice was skeptical. Or silencing. Exactly. Sarah began typing furiously. He was supposed to testify tomorrow about the department's involvement. Someone didn't want him talking. Jeremiah felt a chill. What about Mr. Miller and the other store owners? Already in protective custody, Sarah assured him. And you two need to be careful too. These people are getting desperate. As if to emphasize her point, Jeremiah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You should have stayed quiet. Now everyone pays. Before he could show it to Sarah, shouting erupted from the newsroom. They rushed out to find reporters, clustered around TVs mounted on the walls. Henderson was holding a press conference outside his corporate headquarters. These accusations are absolutely false, Henderson declared, his expensive suit immaculate, his smile confident. This is nothing more than a witch hunt, driven by sensationalist journalism and unreliable witnesses. A troubled teenager's testimony and a few disgruntled business owners don't constitute evidence of some vast conspiracy. The camera panned to show protesters gathering behind the media crews, holding signs demanding justice and accountability. Henderson's smile flickered for just a moment before he continued. I've worked for decades to bring development and prosperity to this city. I won't let my reputation be destroyed by baseless allegations. My legal team will be filing defamation suits against certain journalists who've forgotten the meaning of responsible reporting, Sarah snorted. He's scared. Look at his left hand tapping his leg, classic stress tell. He knows we're close to something big. Back in her office, Sarah pulled up property records, showing how Henderson's companies had systematically bought up stores and warehouses along specific routes through the city. Each purchase was followed by staff changes, security system upgrades, and unusual delivery patterns. It's not just drugs, she explained. They're moving everything. Drugs, weapons, laundered cash. The stores are distribution points, the warehouses are storage, and the port provides cover for shipping it all. In and out. They've built an entire shadow infrastructure. But why our neighborhood? Jeremiah asked. Why target stores there? Because they thought no one would notice, or if they did, no one would care. Lisa's voice was bitter. Poor neighborhoods, minority communities. They counted on people being too afraid to speak up, too distrustful of authorities to report anything. But they didn't count on you, Sarah said to Jeremiah. One person standing up gave others courage. That's what scares them most. Not the investigation or the evidence, but the fact that people aren't afraid anymore. The afternoon brought more developments. Federal agents arrested 3 more police officers connected to false arrests in the neighborhood. 2 city council members resigned suddenly, citing personal reasons. And Henderson's company announced an emergency board meeting. But danger was growing too. A store owner who'd agreed to testify had his business vandalized. Sarah received threatening letters at her home. And outside Jeremiah's school, dark sedans with tinted windows had started, appearing at dismissal time. They're trying to pressure us to back down, Sarah said during another strategy session. Classic intimidation tactics. But look at this. She showed them photos from community meetings happening across the city. People were organizing, sharing information, demanding investigations into other suspicious arrests. The story had grown beyond their neighborhood, exposing similar patterns in other communities. "We need to go public with everything," Sarah declared. "All the evidence, all the connections. Put it all out there where they can't bury it." "Is it enough?" Lisa asked. "To bring down someone like Henderson?" With Jeremiah's testimony as the cornerstone, yes. He saw the package, the man in the suit, the coordinated police response. He can connect the physical evidence to the actual events. That's what makes him so dangerous to them, and so valuable to the investigation. Jeremiah thought about Chief Bradley's death, the vandalized store, the threatening text messages. What if people get hurt? "People are already getting hurt," Sarah replied gently. "Every false arrest, every corrupted officer, every silenced witness, it all hurts the community. The question is, do we let them keep hurting people, or do we stop it?" The decision was made for them that evening. As they left the newspaper office, a black SUV swerved toward them on the street. Lisa yanked Jeremiah back just in time, but the message was clear. The danger was escalating. Instead of frightening them into silence, the attack galvanized their resolve. Sarah immediately called her editor, setting up a live stream for the next morning. Federal agents increased security around key witnesses, and community leaders organized a rally at City Hall. Dawn broke over a changed city. Hundreds gathered downtown, carrying signs and sharing stories of corruption they'd witnessed. News crews interviewed store owners, former police officers who'd been pushed out for questioning dubious arrests, families of people wrongly imprisoned. At 10 o'clock, Sarah began her live stream. Calmly, methodically, she laid out the evidence. Property records showed the pattern of strategic acquisitions. Financial documents revealed the network of shell companies. Security logs demonstrated the coordinated camera failures. And witness statements, including Jeremiah's testimony, connected it all to Henderson and his allies. The response was immediate. Henderson's board of directors suspended him pending investigation. The mayor announced an independent commission to review all arrests connected to the implicated officers, and the U.S. Attorney's Office confirmed a grand jury would convene to consider racketeering charges. But the real change was visible on the streets. People walked taller, spoke more freely, looked out for each other with renewed purpose. The shadow of fear that had hung over the neighborhood for so long was lifting. That afternoon, Jeremiah and Malik shot baskets at their local court, just like old times. But now they noticed details they'd once ignored: the timing of certain deliveries, at nearby stores, the patterns of unfamiliar cars passing through, the way some people seemed to communicate in subtle signals. "You know what's crazy?" Malik said, dribbling slowly. "All this time, we thought we were just living our lives, trying to stay out of trouble. But really, we were surrounded by trouble they created, trouble they used to control everyone." Jeremiah nodded, thinking about how one moment, his decision to speak up in court, had triggered such massive changes. "Think it'll really be different now?" "Look around." Malik gestured to the street, where neighbors chatted openly on stoops. Children played without fearful parents hovering nearby, and even the air seemed lighter somehow. "It's already different. You showed people they don't have to be afraid." Sarah's stories continued to break new ground. Each revelation led to more discoveries, more arrests, more evidence of how deep the corruption had spread. Henderson's empire began to crumble as investors pulled out and partners distanced themselves. But the most profound changes were happening at the community level. Former rivals started working together, sharing information and resources to prevent similar schemes from taking root. Youth organizations partnered with reformed police officers to build trust and communication. Store owners formed networks to support each other and report suspicious activities. A month after Malik's release, the neighborhood held a celebration, not just for him, but for everyone who'd found their voice. Everyone who'd chosen truth over fear. The basketball court where it all began was transformed into a community gathering space, with food, music, and hundreds of people sharing stories and hope. Jeremiah stood with his mother and Sarah, watching families that had once been afraid to leave their homes now dancing in the street. Mr. Miller was there. His store reopened under community ownership. Even some of the federal agents who'd worked the case stopped by, now greeted with cautious respect instead of fear. "You know this isn't over," Sarah reminded them. "Henderson still has allies. There are other cities, other schemes. People like that don't give up power easily." "No," Jeremiah agreed. "But now we know what to look for. And more importantly, we know what happens when people stand together." Lisa hugged him close. "You started something bigger than yourself, baby. Something that can't be stopped by threats or intimidation anymore." As the sun set over their transformed neighborhood, Jeremiah thought about all the moments that had led to this one. The fear when he first witnessed the robbery. The pain of watching Malik's arrest. The courage it took to speak up. The strength they'd all found in standing together. The truth had cost them their illusion of safety, but it had given them something far more valuable. Real power. The kind that comes from unity and purpose. The shadows hadn't disappeared completely. There would always be people who abused power, who preyed on fear and silence. But now they faced a community that knew its strength, that understood the importance of speaking up, that refused to be controlled by fear. As children played freely on the court, where he and Malik had once practiced in nervous silence, Jeremiah realized that some victories weren't about defeating an enemy. They were about transforming fear into strength, silence into voice, isolation into unity. The game had changed, and this time, the whole community was winning. The morning headlines screamed across every news outlet in the city. Police Chief Bradley's death ruled suspicious. Evidence of foul play. Jeremiah stared at his phone screen, the words blurring as memories of the chief's threatening glares in the courtroom flooded back. Sarah Chen had been right. This was far from over. "They're covering their tracks," Sarah explained, pacing her office while federal agents examined new evidence. Bradley's death wasn't just about silencing him. It was a message to anyone else thinking of talking. Agent Diana Roberts, the lead federal investigator, spread photographs across Sarah's desk. They showed the police chief's cell in detail. Things that didn't add up, marks that shouldn't have been there, camera footage that mysteriously cut out during crucial minutes. "We found this in his personal effects," Agent Roberts said, holding up a sealed envelope. "It was meant to be delivered to his lawyer if anything happened to him." She carefully opened it, revealing pages of handwritten notes and a small USB drive. Sarah quickly scanned the papers, her expression growing darker. He was building a case. Names, dates, locations, everything about Henderson's operation. He knew they'd come for him. But why didn't he come forward earlier? Jeremiah asked, looking at the chief's cramped handwriting. Because of this. Agent Roberts pointed to a name that appeared repeatedly in the notes. Governor Michael Sullivan. The room fell silent. Sarah was the first to speak. "The governor? He's involved?" "It explains everything," Agent Roberts said grimly. "Why the corruption went unchecked for so long. Why investigations were blocked. Why Bradley felt he couldn't trust anyone." Lisa, who'd been quietly listening, spoke up. "That's why they were so confident framing Malik. They thought they were untouchable." The USB drive contained videos, security footage Bradley had secretly preserved showing meetings between Henderson, corrupt officers, and high-ranking officials. One clip clearly showed the governor himself visiting Henderson's office late at night, leaving with a briefcase that hadn't been there when he arrived. This goes beyond drug smuggling, Sarah realized, rewatching the footage. They're using the same network to move campaign contributions, bribes, everything. The governor's been helping them expand to other cities. A knock at the door made everyone jump. It was Mr. Miller, looking nervous but determined. "Sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this." He pulled out his phone, showing them a private message he'd received. "All charges dropped if you recant. Think about your family. They're desperate, Agent Roberts observed. Making mistakes. Bradley's death, these threats. They're showing their hand. Sarah's computer chimed with an email alert. Her source at the Port Authority had sent shipping manifests. Dozens of containers with falsified contents, all tied to Henderson's companies. But more importantly, they showed similar patterns at ports in other states. It's not just our city, Sarah said, mapping the connections. They're building identical operations everywhere. Buy properties along strategic routes. Install corrupt. Officials use local gangs as cover. And frame innocent kids like Malik when they need a distraction, Jeremiah added bitterly. Agent Roberts studied the manifests. This is enough for search warrants. We can coordinate with other field offices, hit multiple locations simultaneously. But before they could act, breaking news flashed across Sarah's computer. Governor Sullivan was calling an emergency press conference. They crowded around the screen to watch. The governor looked impeccable as always, his silver hair perfectly styled, his smile practiced and calm. My fellow citizens, he began, I'm deeply troubled by recent allegations of corruption in our great city. I want to assure you that my office takes these claims seriously. Listen to how he distances himself, Sarah murmured. Setting up others to take the fall. And while some may try to twist these events for political gain, the governor continued, I remain focused on serving the people. That's why I'm announcing a special task force to investigate any credible allegations of wrongdoing. His own task force, Agent Roberts scoffed, to control the investigation, and I'm confident that once the facts emerge, the truth will be clear. Thank you, and God bless our great state. As reporters shouted questions, the camera caught something interesting. In the background, partially hidden by curtains, a familiar figure in a dark suit watched the proceedings. The same man Jeremiah had seen outside Miller's store the day of the robbery. Got you, Sarah whispered, freezing the frame. Agent Roberts, run facial recognition on this. I bet he's our link between Henderson and the governor. The results came back quickly. Thomas Ward, Agent Roberts read, former Special Forces, now head of security for several of Henderson's companies. No criminal record, but his name comes up in multiple investigations that were suddenly dropped. He's their cleaner, Sarah realized. When something needs to be handled quietly, like Bradley, Ward takes care of it. Jeremiah's phone buzzed with a text from Malik. Better watch the news. Something big happening at the port. They switched to live coverage. Police and federal agents were swarming Henderson's main shipping terminal. But something was wrong. Containers were already being moved, documents were burning in barrels, and computers were being cleared. They knew we were coming. Agent, Roberts said, already dialing her superiors. Someone tipped them off. The governor's press conference was a distraction. Sarah was typing furiously, coordinating with other journalists. Reports were coming in from across the city, similar scenes at warehouses, storage facilities, anywhere evidence might be hidden. It was a coordinated cleanup operation. We can't let them destroy everything, Jeremiah protested. There has to be something we can do. There is. Sarah pulled up a message from one of her sources. Henderson's planning to run. Private plane fueled and waiting at a small airstrip outside. The city, if he gets away. He doesn't, Agent Roberts said firmly. Mrs. Williams, can you get Mr. Miller to safety? Jeremiah, we'll need your testimony about Ward. You're the only one who can place him at the scene of the original crime. What about the governor? Lisa asked. One thing at a time. First, we stop Henderson. Without him, the whole network starts to crumble. They split up quickly. Federal agents moved to secure the airstrip, while Sarah coordinated with her media contacts to ensure everything was documented. But as Jeremiah and Agent Roberts drove toward the federal building, a black SUV pulled alongside them. Ward, Agent. Roberts breathed, recognizing the driver. She swerved just as he tried to force them off the road. What followed was a tense chase through city streets. Ward's SUV stayed with them, trying repeatedly to either stop them or force a crash. Agent Roberts drove skillfully, but they were running out of options. Call for backup, she ordered Jeremiah. And hold on. She turned sharply into an alley, then another, trying to lose their pursuer. But Ward knew these streets too. Each time they thought they'd lost him, the SUV reappeared. He's not trying to kill us, Agent Roberts realized. He's hurting us somewhere. She was right. They found themselves forced toward the abandoned industrial district, where empty warehouses created a maze of blind corners and dead ends. Perfect for an ambush. But Ward had made one mistake. He'd become predictable. Agent Roberts waited until he tried to force them down a particular street, then suddenly braked and spun the car around. Ward's SUV shot past them, and now they were the pursuers. "Backup's almost here," Jeremiah reported, hearing sirens in the distance. Ward must have heard them too. He accelerated, taking increasingly desperate chances, until finally he misjudged a turn. The SUV clipped a concrete barrier and flipped, sliding to a stop against a chain-link fence. By the time they reached the wreck, Ward was gone. But he'd left something behind. In his haste to escape, he'd dropped a phone. Agent Roberts quickly secured it in an evidence bag. "This could be better than catching him," she said. "These types of guys, they never delete anything. They're too arrogant." She was right. Ward's phone was a treasure trove of information. Messages, photos, coordinates, all documenting the conspiracy's operations. Most importantly, it contained detailed instructions about the cleanup operation, sent directly from Governor Sullivan's private number. Within hours, everything changed. Federal agents, now armed with irrefutable evidence, moved simultaneously across the city. Henderson was arrested trying to board his private plane. Ward was caught trying to flee by boat. And the governor, watching it unfold on television, was confronted by state police in his own office. "Stay with us," Agent Roberts told Jeremiah as they watched the arrests. "Until this is over. They still have people out there, and you're still our key witness." But something had shifted in the city. As news of the arrest spread, more people started coming forward. Other communities reported similar patterns of corruption and false arrests. Other journalists began finding connections to criminal operations in their own cities. The story grew bigger than any one witness or testimony. It became about something larger, about what happens when people refuse to be silenced, when communities stand together against corruption, when truth finally overcomes fear. Late that night, Jeremiah sat with Sarah in her office, watching her update her evidence board one last time. The red strings now stretched beyond their city, connecting to other places where the same pattern was being uncovered. "You know what's remarkable?" Sarah said, stepping back to survey the board. "None of this would have happened if you hadn't spoken up that day in court. One person's courage changed everything." "Not one person," Jeremiah corrected her. "All of us together. You with your investigation, Mr. Miller with his recording, Agent Roberts believing us, my mom standing by me, Malik staying strong. Everyone played a part." Sarah smiled. That's what they never understood. They thought power came from fear, from forcing people to stay quiet. But real power comes from people standing together, speaking truth, refusing to be afraid. Through the window, they could see the city lights twinkling. Somewhere out there, corrupt officials were spending their first night in cells. Evidence was being cataloged, investigations were expanding, and communities were beginning to heal. The conspiracy had been vast, reaching to the highest levels of power, but in the end, it had been broken not by any single piece of evidence or dramatic revelation, but by the cumulative courage of ordinary people who decided that truth mattered more than fear. "What happens next?" Jeremiah asked, thinking about all the lives that had been touched by this. The people wrongly imprisoned, the communities terrorized, the families separated. "Justice happens next," Sarah replied. "Real justice, not the kind they twisted to serve their purposes. It won't be quick or easy, but it will be real." Outside, a police car drove past, one of the good ones now, part of the department's reformed patrol units. Its presence no longer inspired fear, but a cautious hope that things really could change. The city would never be the same. But maybe, Jeremiah thought, that was the point. Maybe it needed to change, needed to face its shadows and heal its wounds and learn to stand together. The conspiracy had been deep, but the truth had run deeper. And in the end, that had made all the difference. The police radio crackled with encrypted transmissions as Agent Roberts' car sped through the pre-dawn darkness. Jeremiah sat in the back seat, his heart pounding as he clutched his phone, on which he'd just captured the most dangerous conversation of his life. 2 hours earlier, he'd been asleep when Sarah's urgent call came in. "We found the police chief's final recording," she'd said, her voice tight with tension. "He wasn't just documenting corruption. He was recording a meeting between Henderson and the governor. They were planning something big, something happening tonight." Now, as streetlights flashed past the car windows, Jeremiah replayed the events that had led them here. After receiving Sarah's call, he'd gone to the abandoned warehouse where she'd tracked Ward's phone signal. Hidden behind old crates, he'd recorded Ward's conversation with Henderson's remaining lieutenants, their plans to destroy evidence, eliminate witnesses, and flee the country with millions in laundered money. "How much time do we have?" Jeremiah asked, watching Agent Roberts navigate the empty streets. "The governor's private jet is scheduled for takeoff in 90 minutes, she replied, checking her watch. "But first we need to secure that recording and get it to the federal prosecutor. Without it, we can't stop them legally." Lisa, sitting in the front passenger seat, turned to look at her son. "Are you sure about what you heard? About the journalist?" Jeremiah nodded grimly. They'd taken Sarah. The conversation he'd recorded made that clear. She was being held at a remote facility, interrogated about her sources, her evidence. They planned to make her disappearance look like an accident, just like Chief Bradley's suicide. "Turn here," Agent Roberts commanded suddenly, cutting the headlights as they approached a private airstrip on the city's outskirts. Security cameras swept the perimeter, but she'd already disabled them remotely. "Remember the plan. We get in, secure the recording, rescue Sarah, and stop that plane. The rest of my team will handle the governor's security detail." They parked behind an old hangar, using its bulk to shield them from view. Other federal agents were already in position, waiting for the signal. Everything hinged on timing. Move too soon, and the governor's people would destroy the evidence. Move too late, and they'd escape with both the money and their secrets. "Someone's coming," Lisa whispered, pointing to approaching headlights. 3 black SUVs rolled onto the airstrip, followed by a sleek limousine. From their hiding place, they watched Ward step out first, scanning the area before opening the limos. Door. Governor Sullivan emerged, looking impeccable even at this hour. Henderson followed, carrying a metal briefcase. "That's it," Agent Roberts breathed. "The evidence they're planning to destroy. Everything that ties them to the smuggling operation." More vehicles arrived. Private security, corrupt officers, everyone who'd profited from the conspiracy gathering, for their escape. Among them, Jeremiah spotted the man who'd threatened Mr. Miller, the officers who'd framed Malik, faces that had haunted their neighborhood for years. A figure was dragged from one of the SUVs. Sarah, her hands bound, her face bruised but her expression defiant. Ward gripped her arm, steering her toward the waiting plane. "Now," Agent Roberts said into her radio. "Move in." Floodlights suddenly illuminated the airstrip as federal agents emerged from every shadow. "FBI, freeze! Put your hands where we can see them." Chaos erupted. The governor's security detail drew weapons. Ward shoved Sarah aside and reached for his gun. Henderson bolted for the plane, still clutching the briefcase. "Stay here," Lisa ordered Jeremiah as she and Agent Roberts joined the federal team. But Jeremiah saw something they'd missed. While everyone focused on the confrontation, one of Henderson's men was sneaking toward Sarah, who lay dazed where Ward had pushed her. The man's intentions were clear in the glint of steel in his hand. Without thinking, Jeremiah sprinted from cover. He tackled the man just as he reached Sarah, sending them both crashing to the tarmac. The knife skittered away into darkness. "Jeremiah?" Sarah's eyes widened as he helped her up. "What are you doing here?" "Saving your life," he managed, ducking as gunfire erupted nearby. "Come on." They ran for cover behind fuel tanks as the federal agents engaged in a firefight with the governor's security team. Through the chaos, Jeremiah saw Henderson reaching the plane's steps. "The briefcase!" Sarah gasped. We can't let them destroy that evidence. Jeremiah had an idea. He pulled out his phone, still recording, and pressed send. The video of Ward's warehouse conversation uploaded to Sarah's secure server, automatically copying to news outlets nationwide. Even if they escape, the truth's already out, he told her. A bullet pinged off the fuel tank, making them both flinch. Agent Roberts was advancing with her team, forcing the corrupt security detail to retreat, but Ward had broken free in the confusion, running toward the plane where Henderson waited. Federal agents, stop or we'll shoot. The governor raised his hands, his political smile finally cracking as agents surrounded him. But Henderson and Ward reached the plane, its engines already roaring to life. They're getting away. Sarah tried to stand, but Jeremiah pulled her back as more shots rang out. Then something unexpected happened. The plane's door opened again, and Henderson stumbled out, falling down the steps. Behind him stood Lisa Williams holding the briefcase. "Mom!" Jeremiah gasped. While everyone had focused on the firefight, Lisa had circled around and snuck aboard the plane. Now she stood in the doorway, the evidence secure in her hands. "It's over," she called to Ward, who still gripped his weapon. Think about it. The governor's arrested. Henderson's finished. That recording is already public. How many more people have to get hurt? For a tense moment, Ward's finger tightened on the trigger. Then, slowly, he lowered the gun and raised his hands. Dawn was breaking as federal agents led the conspirators away in handcuffs. EMTs treated Sarah's injuries while evidence teams secured the briefcase and swept the area. News vans began arriving, drawn by the gunfire and multiple law enforcement vehicles. Here, Agent Roberts handed Jeremiah his phone, which she'd used, to coordinate with her team. You might want to see this. Every major news outlet was running the story. His recording of Ward's warehouse conversation played alongside footage of the governor's arrest. Headlines screamed about corruption exposed, a criminal empire falling, justice finally being served. I told you he'd make a good investigative journalist, Sarah said to Agent Roberts, wincing as Maddox cleaned a cut on her forehead. He's got the instincts for it. Lisa hugged her son close. He's got school to finish first, and maybe a few less dangerous career options to consider. More federal vehicles arrived, along with senior officials and prosecutors. The governor sat in the back of a police car, his perfect appearance now disheveled, his power stripped away. Henderson and Ward were separated for questioning, their network of influence crumbling by the minute. Sarah's phone buzzed constantly as media outlets demanded statements. The story was spreading beyond their city, leading to investigations in other states where Henderson had operations. Already, officials in those jurisdictions were stepping down or facing questions about their connections. What happens now? Jeremiah asked, watching the sun rise over their changed world. Now, Agent Roberts said, we follow the evidence wherever it leads. Every false arrest, every corrupted official, every dirty deal, it all gets exposed. And people like Malik get justice. As if summoned by his name, Malik and his family arrived at the airstrip. They'd been watching the news and came to support their friends. Malik hugged Jeremiah fiercely. Man, when I said you should speak up in court, I didn't expect all this, Malik joked, gesturing at the aftermath of the confrontation. Neither did they, Sarah added, nodding toward the arrested conspirators. That's why they lost. They were so used to people staying quiet, they didn't know what to do when someone finally stood up. The morning news crews were setting up for live broadcasts, their cameras capturing the scene. Federal agents cataloging evidence, corrupt officials in custody, and a community coming together to witness justice being served. Mr. Miller arrived, with coffee and breakfast for everyone, his store's grand reopening temporarily forgotten in the excitement. Other community members followed, drawn by the news and a desire to see the people who terrorized their neighborhood finally face consequences. You know what this means? Malik said, watching Henderson being led to a federal transport vehicle. Every case they touched, every person they framed, it all gets reviewed now. People who lost years of their lives because of their lies, they might get another chance. Jeremiah thought about how close he'd come to staying silent that first day in court. How fear had almost won. How many lives might have stayed buried under the weight of corruption if he hadn't found the courage to speak up. Look, Sarah pointed to her phone. Social media was exploding with similar stories from other cities, people recognizing the same patterns, the same tactics, the same abuse of power. The light they'd helped shine was spreading, illuminating dark corners across the country. They thought they could control everything, Agent Roberts observed, watching the governor being driven away. The police, the courts, the media. But they forgot about ordinary people. People who see things, remember things, and eventually say something. Lisa squeezed Jeremiah's shoulder. Not so ordinary, she said softly. It takes extraordinary courage to stand up when everyone else is afraid. The morning grew brighter as more community members arrived. Someone brought signs from the earlier protests, now modified to celebrate victory instead of demanding justice. Children played while their parents shared stories of how the corruption had touched their lives. Sarah, despite her injuries, was already writing, documenting everything for a story that would help other communities recognize and fight similar corruption. Agent Roberts coordinated with her team, ensuring every piece of evidence was properly secured and every witness protected. Jeremiah stood with his mother and friends, watching their neighborhood gather strength in the morning light. The conspiracy had been vast, its roots deep and its branches high. But in the end, it had been broken not by any single dramatic moment, but by the accumulated courage of people who refused to accept injustice as normal. Hey, Malik nudged him, pointing to the horizon where the sun continued its rise. You think things will really change now? Jeremiah looked around. At Sarah working despite her injuries, at federal agents protecting instead of threatening, at neighbors talking openly without fear, at his mother standing proud and strong. They already have, he answered. Maybe not everything, not all at once, but we showed them something important. What's that? That fear only works if we let it, that the truth is stronger than their lies, that one person speaking up can give others the courage to do the same. As if to prove his point, more people were arriving, bringing food, chairs, turning the scene of confrontation into something like a community celebration. The fear that had kept them isolated was breaking down, replaced by the strength they found in standing together. The governor's plane sat empty on the runway, its engines cold, its escape plan thwarted. Soon it would be impounded as evidence, along with all the other trappings of power the conspirators had used to intimidate and control. But the real victory wasn't in what had been stopped. It was in what had been started. A community finding its voice, people discovering their strength, truth breaking through layers of lies. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows behind them as they faced the dawn of a new day. The recordings were public, the evidence secured, the conspirators in custody. But more importantly, the fear was gone, and in its place grew something stronger. Hope, born from courage, nurtured by truth, shared by an entire community standing together in the morning light. 3 months after the dramatic confrontation at the airstrip, Malik Thompson walked across the stage at the National Justice Reform Conference, his steps confident as he approached the podium. The packed auditorium fell silent, every eye fixed on the young man whose story had helped expose one of the largest corruption scandals in state history. Jeremiah sat in the front row between his mother and Sarah Chen, watching his best friend, prepared to address the gathered crowd of activists, lawmakers, and justice reform advocates. The bruises from that night at the airstrip had long since faded, but the changes their stand had sparked continued to spread. My name is Malik Thompson, he began, his voice strong and clear. 3 months ago, I was prisoner number 247891, accused of a crime I didn't commit. Today, I'm here to tell you about how one person's courage can change an entire system. In the months since the governor's arrest, the world had shifted dramatically. Henderson's criminal empire had crumbled, exposing similar operations across multiple states. The federal investigation had expanded, leading to hundreds of arrests and the review of thousands of suspicious convictions. When they put me in handcuffs that day, Malik continued, I thought it was over. In our neighborhood, we'd learned that the system wasn't designed to listen to people like us. But my best friend, Jeremiah Williams, refused to accept that. He chose to speak up, even when doing so put his own life at risk. Sarah, now fully recovered from her injuries, typed quietly on her laptop, working on her latest story. Her investigation had earned her a Pulitzer nomination. But she seemed more proud of the changes it had helped create. Corrupt officials removed from office, wrongfully convicted people freed, communities empowered to stand up against injustice. It wasn't just one person, Malik said, echoing what they'd all come to understand. It was a journalist who dug deeper when others looked away, a store owner who found the courage to expose threats against his business, federal agents who chose justice over politics, a mother who taught her son to stand up for what's right, and a community that finally said enough is enough. In the audience, Mr. Miller nodded, sitting with other store owners who'd come forward after that first domino fell. Their testimonies had helped prosecutors trace the full extent of Henderson's operation, revealing how legitimate businesses had been corrupted into parts of a vast criminal network. The governor, Henderson, and their conspirators thought they were untouchable, Malik continued. They'd built their power on fear, counting on people to stay quiet, to accept injustice as normal. But they didn't understand something fundamental about truth. It only takes one voice to inspire others to speak. Agent Roberts, seated with her federal colleagues, smiled slightly. The investigation she'd helped lead had expanded far beyond their initial expectations. The evidence from Henderson's briefcase had implicated officials in 3 more states, leading to a nationwide probe of similar corruption schemes. Today, I'm not here just to tell my story, Malik said, his voice growing stronger. I'm here to announce the creation of the Truth Stands Initiative. With support from community leaders and justice reform advocates, we'll provide resources and protection for others who choose to speak up against corruption and abuse of power. The initiative had been Sarah's idea, born from their experiences. It would combine legal support, investigative journalism, and community organizing to help other neighborhoods fight similar battles. Already, groups from other cities had reached out seeking guidance and sharing their own stories of systemic corruption. The scholarship program will be named after Chief Bradley, Malik revealed, causing a stir in the audience. Despite his past mistakes, he ultimately chose truth over power, sacrificing his life to expose corruption. His final evidence helped bring down an entire criminal empire. In the months since Bradley's death, his recorded testimony had proved crucial in securing convictions. The suicide ruling had been officially changed to homicide, and Ward had eventually confessed to arranging it on Henderson's orders. But our work isn't finished, Malik continued, his expression growing serious. While the major players in this conspiracy face justice, the conditions that allowed their corruption to flourish still exist in too many places. Communities still live in fear. People still hesitate to speak up. The system still favors power over truth. Lisa reached over and squeezed Jeremiah's hand. They'd been through so much, threats, surveillance, violence, but had emerged stronger. Their neighborhood had transformed from a place of whispered fears to one of open conversation and mutual support. That's why we're expanding our community oversight program, Malik announced. Working with reformed police departments, we're creating new channels for reporting suspicious activities and protecting witnesses. The same cameras that once fed corrupt officials now help communities monitor those in power. The program had started in their neighborhood, with Mr. Miller's store serving as a pilot location. Now it was spreading, giving other communities tools to prevent corruption from taking root. Even some former officers, disgusted by what they'd discovered about their superiors, had joined the effort. Education is also crucial, Malik said. We're developing programs to help young people understand their rights, recognize abuse of power, and find safe ways to speak up. Because change doesn't just happen in courtrooms and conference halls. It happens in classrooms, on street corners, in everyday moments when people choose truth over fear. Jeremiah thought about all the changes he'd seen in just 3 months. The corrupt officers who'd arrested Malik had been convicted. Henderson and the governor faced decades in prison. Ward had turned state's evidence, helping prosecutors unravel similar operations across the country. But perhaps the most important change, Malik continued, is in how we see ourselves. We're not just victims or witnesses anymore. We're advocates, organizers, leaders. We've learned that justice isn't something that happens to us. It's something we create together. The audience broke into applause, but Malik held up his hand. I'm not finished. Because this isn't just about what we've accomplished. It's about what comes next. Every week, we hear from more communities facing similar struggles, more people finding the courage to speak up, more evidence of corruption being exposed. Sarah had needed to hire additional reporters just to keep up with all the tips and leads flowing in. Her initial investigation had opened floodgates, with people across the country recognizing similar patterns in their own communities and choosing to act. The Truth Stands initiative will ensure they don't fight alone, Malik declared. We'll provide legal support, media connections, and community organizing tools. We'll help protect whistleblowers and witnesses. We'll make sure their stories are heard and their evidence reaches the right authorities. In the audience, Jeremiah spotted familiar faces from their neighborhood. Basketball teammates who'd supported Malik, store owners who'd fought back against intimidation, families who'd lost loved ones to false arrests and were now seeing justice done. But most importantly, Malik said, his voice softening with emotion, we'll remind them of something powerful. No one who stands up for truth stands alone. Behind every whistleblower, every witness, every person who chooses courage over fear, there's a community ready to stand with them. The standing ovation lasted several minutes. As people rose to their feet, Jeremiah saw tears in his mother's eyes. Sarah had stopped typing, watching Malik with proud satisfaction. Agent Roberts nodded approvingly, knowing that community support was often more effective than witness protection programs. After the speech, they gathered in the conference center's atrium. Community leaders from other cities crowded around, eager to learn from their experience. Journalists requested interviews. Lawmakers promised support for reform legislation. Did you ever imagine this? Malik asked Jeremiah quietly, taking a break from the crowd. That day in court, when you first stood up? Jeremiah shook his head. I just knew I couldn't let them send you to prison for something you didn't do. Everything else, it just grew from there. Like ripples in a pond, Sarah added, joining them, one act of courage inspiring others. One truth leading to more truths. One community showing others what's possible. Lisa brought them coffee, her pride evident as she watched the crowd discussing plans for change. You boys have started something important, she said. Something that can't be stopped by threats or intimidation anymore. Because it's not just about us now, Malik agreed. It's about everyone who's ever faced injustice and felt powerless to fight back. Everyone who's seen corruption and thought they had to accept it. Everyone who's been afraid to speak up. Through the conference center's windows, they could see protesters gathering peacefully outside another courthouse in another city, inspired by their story to demand investigations into their own local corruption. The ripples continued to spread. You know what's really changing? Jeremiah observed. It's not just the systems or the laws. It's people. They're not afraid anymore. They're finding their voices, supporting each other, standing up for what's right. Sarah nodded, already thinking about her next story. That's what Henderson and the governor never understood. They thought power came from making people afraid. But real power comes from people choosing not to be afraid anymore. The afternoon. Sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows behind them, but illuminating their faces as they looked forward. The path ahead wasn't easy. There would be more battles, more corruption to expose, more communities needing support. But they weren't the same people who'd started this journey. Jeremiah wasn't just a witness anymore, but a voice for change. Malik wasn't a victim, but a leader inspiring others. Sarah wasn't just reporting stories, but helping create new ones. Lisa wasn't just a protective mother, but a symbol of courage for other families. Together, they'd shown that truth could overcome fear, that justice was possible if people stood together. that one person's courage could light the way for others. The ripples of that first moment in court continued to spread, touching more lives, inspiring more change, creating more hope. As they watched the sun set on another day of positive change, they knew their work wasn't finished, but they also knew something else, something powerful that gave them strength to continue. No matter what challenges lay ahead, truth would always stand, as long as people stood together to defend it. The future was bright with possibility, not because the darkness had been completely banished, but because they had shown others how to light their own way through it. And that light, passed from person to person, community to community, would continue to grow stronger with each new voice that chose to speak up, each new heart that chose courage over fear, each new spirit that chose to stand for truth. What would you risk to stand up for what's right? If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful tales of ordinary people finding extraordinary courage. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that one voice, speaking truth, can change everything. Leave a comment below about a time when you chose to stand up, because every story of courage deserves to be heard. Remember, in a world where injustice often seems too big to fight, it only takes one person to show others what's possible. Sometimes, that person could be you.